the rest is the same. This paper intends to deal with God's face personification in the Jewish pre-modern literature. The personification of God's face is a special case of a metaphor. Let's start by looking at the second verse in the first chapter of the Bible. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. In the utterance, darkness was upon the face of the deep, we usually won't treat the face of the deep as a metaphor. It will be more common to treat it as a dead metaphor. That is because we have the conventional utterance upon the face of, and we automatically grasp it in the meaning of on them, without referring to the face that are mentioned. We don't think of the face of the deep or the face of the waters. Recent cognitive linguistics. Sorry. See, there's some kind of problem in the picture. And what? I see. Here you see the picture. Not this way. Oops. Okay. So we can manage without it. Sorry about that. Recent cognitive linguistic studies offer a different approach to this problem. Lykoff and Johnson in 1980, here there's supposed to be a picture of the. Sorry. Here is supposed to be a picture of their book of Lykoff and Johnson in 1980. They suggested that all metaphors are alive because they are a cognitive concept that we live by. Metaphors are not just a matter of language, but govern our everyday functioning, our thought and action. Metaphors cannot be separated from their experiential basis. They are embodiment. The fact that they are conventionally fixed within the lexicon of the language makes them no less alive. In fact, the most alive and powerful metaphors are those that are so automatic as to be unconscious and effortless. That is the case of the utterance upon the face of the deep. In a more careful look, we will see that this is a clear case of personification metaphor, because we are imputing human qualities like having face to a thing that is not human, the deep and the waters. In what way the deep have face? It will be more obvious if we read this utterance in the Hebrew origin, because something was lost in the translation. The Hebrew word for the deep is tehom. Many scholars have mentioned the etymology of the word tehom to the legend monster of the deep waters, and here is very, fortunately that we don't have the picture of the monster. It's very unfortunately, but you can imagine it. Imagine the monster from the deep water.
It was there and it's gone.
Oh, no, everything is gone. Let's see, maybe. What's happening here? Maybe. No, everything's not lost. I will continue with that. You have to imagine it. The monster, the Tehom, is the legend monster of the deep waters, Tiamat, called Tiamat, from the Babylonian mythology called Enuma Elish. But not many saw that just as the giant monster from the Babylon myth had face, and the god named Marduk, that's the name of the god from the Babylonian myth, the god named Marduk had to kill it by blowing wind into her open mouth while she tried to swallow him. So the deep, the Tehom from the Hebrew Bible, had also face, the face of the deep, remember, the face of the deep, and the wind of God that was being translated to the Spirit of God in the English translation was blowing on the face of it. In the origin, the Hebrew Bible, the name is the wind of God, the wind of God, not the Spirit of God. The face of the, and the wind of God was blowing on the face of it, the face of the deep waters. When we read the Hebrew Bible with the reflection of the Near East Babylonian myth, the personification of the face of the deep becomes more alive. Before I could use this approach to the means of this paper, further distinction must be made, the distinction between metaphor and metonymy. Lykov in 1987, and here there's supposed to be a picture of his book, has developed the theory of the two-domain claim for metaphor and the one-domain claim for metonymy. In his theory, in metaphor there are two conceptual domains, and one is understood in terms of the other, while metonymy involves only one conceptual domain. The metonymic pole operates within a single domain, not across domains. Via metonymy, one can refer to one entity in a schema by referring to another entity in the same schema. Of course, metaphor and metonymy do have some things in common. Both are conceptual in nature, and both can be made part of our everyday conceptual system, and thus used automatically, effortlessly, and without conscious awareness. In fact, sometimes the same expression can be interpreted metaphorically or metonymically, depending only on the context of the utterance. An example for the differences between metaphor and metonymy could be the one given by the literary scholar Victor Shklovsky. Okay, I won't read it anymore. I have to you have to help me with your imagination. So now you have to imagine a small girl in Victor Shklovsky scholar, the literary scholar, mentioned. In his famous article, Art as Technique, in his example, he attempts to attract the attention of a young child who is eating bread and butter. Now you have to picture a small child eating bread and butter, and gets the butter on her fingers. The butter is making her fingers dirty. He then calls, "Hey, Butterfingers." This figure of speech can be interpreted only as metonymy because of the context. The speaker chooses to shorten the sentence, and instead of using a full sentence such as, "Hey, all your fingers are getting covered with butter," he simply calls Butterfingers. By doing so, he drops out most of the words and leaves one word to stand for the words that had been omitted. The word Butterfingers stands as part for the whole of the sentence, and it was chosen because of the causal connection and the closeness between the butter and the fingers. This is what the linguistic Roman Jacobson calls the contiguity pole, that enables one word to stand for another word on the contiguity of the sentence, even if the other words are dropped out. This is also what cognitive linguistics like George Lykov called the one-domain theory for metonymy. In a different context, and that's another example that Victor Shklovsky gives, in a different context, the same sentence can be interpreted only as metaphor. Think of the same child now playing with Victor Shklovsky glasses and dropping them down. He calls, "Hey, Butterfingers." This sentence is used now as a metaphor. The speaker connects two different domains, the finger and the butter, on the basis of similarity he finds between them. The unstable fingers that drop the glasses look to him as if they are slippery like butter. There is no causal connection or closeness between the fingers and the butter. This is the two-domain theory for metaphor. Another example need to be given to illustrate the difference between metonymy and personification metaphors. Lyckoff and Johnson demonstrate this difference by using the following case, and this is a case they gave in their book. The ham sandwich, no, there won't be anything to see here. Yeah, the ham sandwich is waiting for his check. That is the example they give. The ham sandwich is waiting for his check. This is a case of metonymy because we are using one entity, the ham sandwich. It's in a situation, the context is a situation in a restaurant, and one of the waiters says the ham sandwich is waiting for his check. The ham sandwich they are using the one entity, the ham sandwich, to refer to another entity that is related to it, which is the person who ordered the ham sandwich. Such cases are not instances of personification metaphor, since we do not understand the ham sandwich by imputing human qualities to it. But I would like to stress that sometimes the same expression can be referred both as metonymy or as personification metaphor, and the only way to decide whether this is a metonymy or personification will be the context. Think of the following example, and now I need again your imagination. A waiter in a restaurant sees that one of the legs of one of the tables of table number 6 in the restaurant is not steady. Is moving. Is not steady. He starts to look for something to put between the unstable leg and the floor. To put something here to make it more stable. The head waiters ask him what he is looking for, and he answers, "Table 6 is dancing." This is a case of personification metaphor. The speaker is imputing the table like if it is a person that can dance. There are no actual human beings referred to. But now think of the same expression in a different context. The restaurant starts to play some music and people are dancing. The head waiters call for one of the waiters and tell him to look if the customers in table number 6 want their check. The waiter goes and comes back and says, "Table 6 is dancing." This time, this is a metonymy. What it means is that the people around table 6 are dancing now. There is nobody around the table. So table number 6 is dancing. Nobody is there. This time, this is a metonymy. He uses one entity, the table, to stand for another entity that is related to it. The customers that are eating on that table and now are dancing. I wish to use this approach to describe the shift from the Middle Ages Theosophic Kabbalah, it's the Jewish mystical movement, to the early Hasidism, that's a more modern, still pre-modern mystical group in the 18th century, as a shift from the metonymic pole to the metaphoric pole. My claim is that in Theosophic Kabbalah, there is a tendency towards metonymy in the balance between metaphors and metonymy, whereas in the shift from the Kabbalah to the early Hasidism, the balance changes from metonymy to metaphoric dominance. In Theosophic Kabbalah, things in the word are part of the linguistic operation based on contiguity between the lower and the higher worlds. This chain of being, the emanation of the divine light from higher worlds through what is called in Hebrew the Sefirot, the 10 aspects or emanation of God. And now it was supposed to be a picture of a diagram of the Theosophic order of the 10 emanations of God. There are 10 emanations. It's a Neoplatonic model of the light that goes from one entity to another down to the physical world. It's a chain of being, and the light goes from one entity to another.
Is it the tree of life you're talking
The
about?
tree of life, the tree of life. It's another way to describe it. Yeah, it's called the tree of the Sefirot in the Hebrew Kabbalah. And these 10 entities, the 10 aspects or emanation of God, From there and down to the lower world, enable this tree of like this chain of being, enable lower parts to represent as metonymies the higher parts of the divinity. In the Kantian approach, this is the one domain, one gestalt. It's one frequency, one gestalt. He calls it a single ICM. ICM in the cognitive linguistics is called idealized cognitive model. One idealized cognitive model. In the early Hasidism, this chain of being is weakened and a new spiritual need arises. The one continuity now has to be felt in the human mind, which observes it as two different domains. The world, which is one domain, as disconnected from the deity, which is another domain. These two domains need to be connected in the human mind by the use of metaphor, which enables to understand one thing in terms of another, and in so doing connects them to each other. Metonymy is weakened, while metaphor becomes stronger. I would like to demonstrate this claim through the case study of the expression, the face of God. Looking at this expression outside of its context, it appears that this is a clear case of personification, which means it is a metaphor. That is because it understands one domain, the deity, in terms of another domain, the human face. However, even outside of its context, this sentence is actually a combination of metaphor and metonymy. This is because the metonymy used here is a conventional one, the single organ for the whole person. The face is the single organ that stands for the whole deity. We can learn that we have this conventional metonymy from the following instance. If I ask you to send me a picture of you, and you send me a picture of a shoulder, now there's supposed to be a picture of my shoulder here, so do it like that. A picture of my shoulder. I will be surprised if you send me a picture of your shoulder. The more common thing to do is for you to send me a picture of your face. And now it's supposed to be a picture of me doing like that. The picture of the face. That is because we have the conventional metonymy of the face as standing for the whole person. Thus, the expression the face of God combines metaphor and metonymy. The personification metaphor of God as a person, and the metonymy of the face as standing for the whole person. Remember, we must look at any utterance in its context before we conclude if it is either a metaphor or a metonymy. Let's first look at this basic and commonly used expression in the way it appears in the classic literature of the Zohar. This is a mystical book that had been apparently composed during the 13th century in Arabic, in the language of Arabic. In one of the sections of this book, called Idra Rabba, that's the name of the section, the main experience described is the spiritual enterprise of the group that gathers in the great assembly with their leader, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The gathering aims to restore some aspect in the face of God that lost their balance between grace and judgment in the process of the creation of the world. After the restoration of the divinity, the mystical group aims to witness the emanating face of God. The divinity in Idra Rabba has two faces. The long face, that's one of the faces of God, given in the Arabic term Arich Anpin, meaning long face, and the small face, similarly given as Zeir Anpin, the small face. If we have the diagram of the 10 emanation, the first emanation is the long face, and the sixth emanation is the small face, and they are connected together in the middle of the emanation. The mystical group needs to rectify the long face, which does not shine its light on the small face in the proper way. This results in a disharmony that pervades the higher and the lower worlds. The Great Assembly is meant to fix this theosophic disorder and renew the harmony between the two faces of the divinity. What is important to our discussion about metaphor and metonymy is that seeing the expression of the face of God in its context of the Zoharic literature proves that the connection between God and the human face are in one domain. Let me quote a short passage from the Idra Rabbah as a way of demonstrating the dominance of the metonymic pole in the Zohar. This passage describes the way the long face shines its light on the small face after being restored. And now I'm quoting. In the parting of hair on the head of the long face, to right and left, one path proceeds, illuminating 270 worlds, and from it shines a path by which the righteous are illumined in the world that is coming. From here, the path branches into 613 paths, diverging in the small face. End of quote. This short passage evinces a clear Neoplatonic model of the emanation of the divine light through the hierarchy of the worlds, from the higher world of the Sphirot and down to the physical world. The light shines from the head of the long face in one path, and through the lower world of the small face, it diverges into the 613 commandments of the Torah, the Hebrew Torah, and shines on this world. This cognitive model, usually called the great chain of being in cognitive and religious studies, connects the things in this world, in this case the human face, to the things in the deity, the Sphirot. It is a combination of a system based on causality, in which one entity affects another, with a system based on similarity, in which the things in this world are created in the structure of the divinity and reflected. It needs to be emphasized, however, that in this combination, the system of the metaphoric similarity or resemblance between the face of man and the face of God is the result of the system of the causal relations between the higher and the lower worlds. In other words, the metonymic system is a precondition for the metaphoric similarity. This interlaid relation reflects the one-domain theory of metonymy. One can refer to one entity in a scheme by referring to another entity in the same scheme, the scheme of the emanation of the divine light through all the worlds. The long face of God and the small face of Him are connected and close to each other, and the small face is connected to the smaller face of man. That is why the face of man can represent the face of God and can represent the changing balance inside the deity between harmony and disharmony, between the grace of God and His judgment. This contextual framework changes in the course of the years between the Middle Ages to the 18th century and the birth of the Hasidic movement. When you look at the Hasidic literature, you often see that the Hasidic master used the same terminology as the Theosophic Kabbalah, but something has changed. The great chain of being still functions, but it has been weakened and drifted to the background. A new spiritual need arises. As I mentioned earlier, the one continuity between man and God is now felt to exist in the human mind that observed it as two different domains, the Word as disconnected from the deity. This is what the great scholar Martin Buber called Kabbalah that became ethos, meaning that the theosophic knowledge now needs to be felt in the human spirit. The metonymic pole weakens because it is unable to fulfill this spiritual need, and the metaphoric pole becomes stronger.
Could you repeat that last paragraph?
About Martin Buber?
No, about the theosophic, just the last few sentences you just said.
About what I mean here is just the You have to feel the connection between God and man. It doesn't, in the Zoharic literature, it's obvious that there is a straight connection. There is a frequency. And in the Hasidic movement, you have to feel it. It's not obvious. You can feel that, you can have the belief that the word is disconnect from the deity. And it's operated, the way to connect them together is by the metaphoric pole. The metonymic pole gets weakened and the metaphoric pole gets stronger. That's what I mean. Let me give a short example for this phenomenon that is related to the expression we saw in the Zohar, the face of God. One of the first teachers of the Hasidic movement was Rabbi Gedalia Rabinovich of Lineage, a disciple of the Maggid of Mezrich. In his book called Tesuot Cher in Hebrew, he uses the same expression, the face of God. However, something in the balance between metaphor and metonymy in this use of this expression has changed from the time of the Zohar. I will quote a short passage from this book and I will conclude it in the end of the session. I will quote it. I'll start a quote. The blessed Holy One hides in all things as the innermost aspect of the world, as in the shape of garments. It is important to quote it because it's emphasized it. And the wise has eyes in his head to connect the part to the whole, and to understand that the blessed Holy One dwells inside all things. And when, God forbid, a person should come and disconnect the garments from the innermost aspect of the world, and drive the glory of the high God from them, and say that the blessed Holy One is driven out from there, he awakens the divine judgment upon himself. God forbid, for in so doing, the innermost aspect of the world now hides its face from him. And when that person understands that no place is devoid of him, and the whole earth is filled with his glory, the evil forces are driven from him. And that is the meaning of you should not have other gods before me. Literally means on my face. Before me, on my face. Which means don't be as an angered person who separates God from the world, who says of my face, which are my garments, that I do not dwell in them. For Rabbi Gedalia, the main problem is to be able to connect in one's mind God on one hand and his face, which is the things in the world, on the other. In the Idra Rabbah, in the Zohar, it is obvious that there is one continuity between the higher worlds and the lower worlds, and the focus is on the theosophic knowledge of the deity. For the Hasidic master, this single continuity is weakened and now has to be felt and recognized by the believer. The person needs to connect the part, which is the things in the world, to the whole, which is the deity. The illusion that this world can exist regardless to the deity is a dangerous one because it can bring men to disbelieve in God. God will then hide his face from this person and bring his judgment upon him. The way to overcome this illusion is to recognize that the presence of God resides in all things in the world. By so doing, one can connect heaven and earth, the material and the spiritual, and God and his face. While in the Zohar, the different faces of the God, the long face and the small face, are connected in one domain via metonymy, in the early Hasidism, God is connected to his face in the linguistic operation across two domains via metaphor. So I will conclude and say that I will say briefly that the notion of metaphor and metonymy can be very fruitful if they are embraced in the religious studies. Thank you. I'm sorry about that. Sorry about